Welcome back to this last lecture under Module 1, and this time we will talk about mainstreaming climate risk management. There are 4 topics I'd like to discuss with you. First, we'll look at climate risk management, or CRM, then concepts and principles of mainstreaming at the national level, and finally, a project-level screening approach. So first, let's begin by defining what CRM, or climate risk management, is. It is a development of precautionary programs that provide timely resources to communities and agencies to improve collective and household abilities to manage climate-related risks. At the household level, it can be diversifying crop portfolios and farming lands. Strategies are very contextual at this level, and it can be based on indigenous or local knowledge and rely on limited resources. At the community-based level, it can involve informal mechanisms, village-based networks, or extended family networks. Such mechanisms can respond to limited shocks. And then finally, at the national level, these are state-supported risk reduction systems. They can have wider spatial scope and have access to greater resources. Indeed, most countries in our part of the world have well-developed disaster management systems and do provide relief during drought and floods and other disasters. Well, a well-designed climate risk management programs should first respond to demands of communities and agencies, strengthen existing community and household precautionary strategies, be sustainable with respect to fiscal resources and institutional structures, integrate a range of information and resources such as climate and price information, agricultural production inputs, and credit. They should also be able to communicate probabilities involving a diverse set of outcomes, promote timely no-regrets interventions that avoid expensive or irreversible decisions, and integrate decisions across local, regional, and even national level. Second, let's look at the basic concepts and principles of mainstreaming. Over the last few years, there has been a rising interest among policymakers, donors, and development agencies on the necessity for climate change adaptation. And this has been expressed most commonly on the calls to mainstream it, whether into local, national, or international development policies, planning, and activities. Now, there is no universally accepted definition of mainstreaming, but note that the key word is integration. And now I'd like to show you some of the definitions that have been forwarded. First, mainstreaming refers to the full integration of climate change adaptation policies into national development programs. Another definition says the integration, again note that word, integration, the integration of climate change vulnerabilities or adaptation into some aspect of related government policy such as water management, disaster preparedness, and emergency planning or land use planning. And finally, again, it is the integration of policies and measures that address climate change into development planning and sectoral decision-making. Now, what are the benefits? Why do we want to mainstream climate change adaptation? Well, adaptation to climate change will become part of or will be consistent with other well-established programs. In addition, it will help prevent actions that go against the goals of development. These are the so-called maladaptation. It has also the potential to attract a more efficient use of financial and human resources. Now, the level of climate change adaptation mainstreaming is in fact most advanced in the context of ODA, or Official Development Assistance. In developing countries, actual projects on the ground to mainstream adaptation to climate change remains limited, and significant institutional and cognitive barriers remain. There is a perceptible increase in the number of adaptation projects underway in many developing countries. However, many of these projects are small, standalone projects which are difficult to scale up and mainstream into national planning and development process. Now, 3 general types of adaptation have been suggested. The first one is serendipitous adaptation, more like accidental adaptation. This refers to activities undertaken to achieve development objectives and incidentally achieve adaptation objectives. The second one is climate proofing of ongoing development efforts. These include activities added on to an ongoing development initiative to ensure its success under a changing climate. And finally, discrete adaptation. These are projects undertaken or activities undertaken specifically to achieve climate adaptation objectives. However, some people have expressed concerns about mainstreaming. Number one, they said that limited funds for adaptation to climate change in developing countries could be diverted into more general development activities, diluting their effectiveness as far as climate change adaptation is concerned. On the other hand, some people also say an increased focus on climate risks will divert money from development assistance that is meant to address challenges seen as being more urgent than climate change. So this is the reverse of number one. And third, developed countries could view mainstreaming as an opportunity to free them from their UNFCCC obligations to provide developing countries with new and additional financial resources for adaptation. Now third, how do we mainstream at the national level? How do we promote integration of climate change adaptation in the policy and development arena in developing countries? President Klein proposed the use of procedural, organizational, normative, and reframing approaches in adaptation to mainstreaming, and we will look at them one by one. First, the procedural approach involves the introduction of new or modification of existing decision-making procedures. For example, project evaluation, such as through environmental and social impact assessments, could be revised to include adaptation to climate risks. Secondly, organizational approach. It involves changes in the structure and staffing of relevant organizations. For example, this approach could include staff training and awareness, amendments of formal staff and departmental responsibilities, staff rotation, merging of ministries, creation of new ministries, and structural changes of budget lines. Well, a common problem with this approach is that they simply take time to stick due to institutional inertia. And third, a normative approach. This involves high-level, perhaps parliamentary or cabinet, commitments to the issue to be integrated. This is a way of clearly communicating political will and energizing action at all levels of government. Then finally, the reframing approach. It involves reframing of traditional sector activities to enhance appreciation of long-term outcome and conditions for successful mainstreaming. Now here, I'd like to show you some potential interventions for each of the approach. So under the procedural approach, these are the following examples: development of process of climate risk screening of projects or portfolio screening. I will discuss that under my last topic in a few minutes. Second, development of guidance tools, improvement of consultations with stakeholders, improvement of access and use of scientific information, revision of EIA or Environmental Impact Assessment System to include climate risks, and lastly, revision of irrigation construction standards to include climate risks. In terms of organizational, it can be capacity building or staff training and awareness, setting up of a climate change office, appointment of a climate change officer, amendment of staff and other responsibilities to include climate change. Under normative, can be high-level commitments, for example, by ministers or secretaries, and commitment of financial resources. And finally, under reframing, refocusing existing programs and highlighting climate change adaptation. Now, my last topic is a project screening approach. This is based on the work of Burton Van Alst for the World Bank, and it is a screening tool that is needed to select which projects merit further risk assessment from the point of view of climate hazards, including future climate change. A preliminary screening of projects for climate risk should be. Okay, let's cut it in a fourth.